Right now, while you're watching this, your phone is broadcasting your location to at least 7 different parties. You didn't agree to 6 of them. You don't know their names? And turning off location services doesn't stop any of them. I want to walk you through exactly what's happening, because the industry has convinced an entire generation of users that a little toggle in the settings menu equals privacy. It doesn't, it never did. And the mechanisms that actually track you operate at layers most users have no way to even see, let alone disable. Let's start with the most basic one, the one you already suspect. Cell tower registration. The moment your phone powers on, it sends out a signal looking for the nearest base station. That's not optional. A phone that doesn't register with a cell tower cannot receive calls, cannot send SMS, cannot do anything that justifies calling it a phone. And every single time it registers, the carrier logs it. Tower ID timestamps signal strength from neighboring towers. 3 towers and a bit of trigonometry, and they have your location within roughly 50 meters in urban areas. This data is retained, it's legally demanded by law enforcement, and in many jurisdictions, it's also sold in aggregated form to data brokers. That part is legal. That part has been legal for over a decade. Now here's where it gets stranger. Even when you switch your phone to airplane mode, the story isn't as clean as the icon suggests. On most modern devices, airplane mode disables the cellular radio, yes, but the baseband processor, the isolated chip that handles cellular communication, retains state. When you toggle airplane mode off, the phone re-registers instantly, and that registration event, plus the duration of your silence, becomes part of a behavioral fingerprint. Carriers and analytics partners use these patterns. Sudden radio silence in a specific geographic cell followed by reappearance 50 kilometers away tells a story. But forget the carrier. Let's talk about the applications you installed. An average smartphone runs somewhere between 80 and 140 apps. A 2024 analysis by privacy researchers at the University of Calgary examined the top 2,000 apps on both major platforms and found that 68% of them contained at least one advertising SDK capable of reading coarse location without explicit location permission. How? Because location data doesn't only come from GPS, it comes from Wi-Fi network names your phone has seen. It comes from Bluetooth beacon IDs your phone has detected. It comes from IP geolocation, which can place you within the right city without any of the above. And none of those data sources require the location permission prompt. Think about that for a second. You denied an app location access, it still knows where you are. Because the list of Wi-Fi networks your phone has scanned in the last 10 minutes is, in aggregate, more unique than your fingerprint. There are databases, public and commercial, that map virtually every Wi-Fi SSID and BSSID on Earth to a specific physical location. Weigel is the most famous public one. Apple and Google each maintain their own proprietary versions. Feed a list of nearby SSIDs into that database, and the output is a latitude and longitude, often accurate to the front door of a specific building. So when an app asks for permission to scan Wi-Fi networks, and you grant it because of course you want to join Wi-Fi networks, you've handed it a location oracle far more precise than GPS ever was. Here's the second layer most users never consider: advertising identifiers. Every phone ships with a unique string that advertisers use to tie behavior across apps. On iOS, it's called IDFA, Identifier for Advertisers. On Android, it's the GAID, Google Advertising ID. Apple's App Tracking Transparency rollout in 2021 made IDFA opt-in, which reduced abuse but didn't eliminate it. Android didn't make the equivalent move until 2024, and even now, the ID remains active by default on the majority of devices. Advertisers combine that ID with timestamped location pings and construct a profile they call a device graph. The device graph doesn't know your name in theory. In practice, cross-referencing the device graph with login events from apps that do know your name turns the anonymous identifier into a labeled one within hours. And then there's the really uncomfortable part. Even when you reset the advertising ID, even when you factory reset the phone, fingerprinting fills the gap. A combination of your screen resolution, installed fonts, battery health curve, accelerometer calibration noise, radio frequency offsets in your modem, and dozens of other values forms a device fingerprint that survives every reset you can perform at the software level. Researchers at IEEE published work in 2023 showing that accelerometer manufacturing variants, alone provides enough entropy to uniquely identify a phone within a population of 10 million devices. Every phone's accelerometer is slightly miscalibrated in a unique way. That miscalibration is readable by any web page that runs JavaScript. No permission prompt needed. You might be wondering at this point whether turning off the phone entirely solves the problem. It mostly does, but only mostly. Since iPhone 11 and the equivalent Android flagships, devices include ultra-wideband chips and Bluetooth low-energy radios that can continue broadcasting after the operating system has shut down, as long as the battery has charge. Apple's Find My network uses this behavior intentionally. Your powered-off iPhone still pings nearby Apple devices for up to 24 hours. Those pings are encrypted, yes, but they're also a signal. A signal that says a specific device exists in a specific place at a specific time. Security researchers from TU Darmstadt demonstrated in 2022 that this low-power mode is reachable by firmware-level malware, and they published the proof of concept. Apple has mitigated some of the findings. Not all. Now let's bring this home. What does a realistic threat model look like for a person who just wants a phone without a surveillance backpack attached? First, recognize that the permission system is a consent theater, not a privacy boundary. It stops casual data collection. It does not stop sophisticated collection. Every app you install adds passive telemetry surfaces that don't show up in any settings menu. Second, understand that the operating system itself is a telemetry endpoint. Stock Android phones beacon to Google servers every few minutes, transmitting data that researchers at Trinity College Dublin documented in a 2021 paper as being roughly 20 times larger in volume than the equivalent iOS telemetry, which itself is substantial. A stock device is not a blank device. Third, the SIM card itself is a tracking mechanism that operates below the operating system layer. Even de-Googled Android builds and privacy-oriented operating systems like Grafeneos cannot prevent the cellular baseband from dutifully announcing your presence to the nearest tower. The carrier always knows where the SIM is. Always. That is a physical layer property of cellular networking, not a software choice. So what actually reduces this footprint meaningfully? Moving to a privacy-focused operating system on a supported device cuts out Google's telemetry layer entirely. That's a real reduction, not total privacy, a real reduction. Using a prepaid SIM purchased with cash and registered to no identity prevents the carrier's location log from being tied to you personally, assuming you never carry the device near your home address or workplace in a way that would correlate. Maintaining a separate device that stays home and is only used for identity-bound accounts, while a second device handles travel, is a serious commitment, but it works. Disabling Wi-Fi scanning when not actively connecting to networks reduces the SSID fingerprint leak. Using randomized MAC addresses, which modern iOS and Android both support, reduces passive Wi-Fi tracking by retail analytics platforms. These platforms are a whole industry I could do a separate hour on. Short version, a mall with cameras and Wi-Fi probes can map your visit duration, path through the store, and return frequency tied to the MAC your phone broadcasts. Unless that ACK rotates, even with all of this, you are still trackable. I want to be honest about that. The question is not whether you can disappear. The question is how much friction you can introduce into the process of tracking you and how many of the 7 parties I mentioned at the start you can cut down to 2 or 3. There's one more thing I want to leave you with because it matters more than the technical detail. The reason phone tracking is so ubiquitous is not that every actor involved is malicious. It's that the tracking infrastructure is the substrate the entire mobile economy rests on. Ad-funded apps need it. Carriers depend on it for network management. Analytics firms, insurance underwriters, real estate developers, municipal traffic planners, epidemic modelers, they all draw on the same data stream. It's not a dark conspiracy. It's the default business model. And the default business model has no incentive to change as long as users treat a location toggle in settings as meaningful control. The honest version of phone privacy in 2026 is this. You cannot fully opt out while carrying a cellular connected device. You can dramatically reduce your footprint with effort. You can make yourself less interesting, less profitable, and less precisely located. But the phone in your pocket is, at a fundamental level, a locator that also happens to make calls. That's the architecture. That's been the architecture since the first GSM standards. In the early 90s, and every generation since has added new layers rather than subtracting any. If you want to get serious, start by auditing which apps on your current device have Wi-Fi scanning permission and strip that down to a handful you actually need, Look at Bluetooth permission next. Then location permission, including the precise versus approximate setting. Then review what's still logged in to what advertising accounts. It's tedious, it takes an afternoon. It will cut your measurable exposure by a meaningful amount. And then ask yourself the harder question. Do you accept the residual tracking that remains because the alternative is living without a phone? Or do you want to restructure which device carries which identity? Because that's the actual privacy decision, not a toggle. A question about how you want to shape your digital shadow, understanding that the shadow never disappears, only moves. The phones are still tracking you. They were always going to. Knowing exactly how is the difference between consenting to it with eyes open and being handled without your awareness. I'd rather you have the eyes open version. Drop your questions in the comments if you want me to go deeper on any specific layer of this, because each one is its own rabbit hole, and I'll keep mapping them as long as you keep asking.